Now joining me on our All Chronicle News panel tonight, Bobby Gelko on the state prison proposal, Rachel Gordon on San Francisco's controversial Sanctuary City Ordinance, and Tom Abate on today's meeting about the closing of Fremont's NUMMI plant and job losses there. So, Tom, what factors have led us to this point, where we're at this point of near closure?
This plant has been in Fremont in various forms since 1950s. GM, General Motors, operated it once by itself. It closed it in '82, and after a couple of years it was reopened in partnership with Toyota. That partnership went for 25 years again, and then last year GM said it was going to pull out, and finally Toyota followed suit. So that brings us to a point where we have a massive factory that's about to close down that's been a linchpin of the East Bay economy.
Well, you had the man who's responsible of the White House Council in this area on workers and communities that are being impacted in our area today. So what did he bring, or what was the point in coming at this point, since the plant is already scheduled for closure?
Well, Ed Montgomery, the president's special advisor on plant closures. There's been a lot of them all throughout the country. And unfortunately, he's had to develop some expertise on what do you do? How do you retrain the workers? How do you repurpose the site? What do you do to try to create a new industry in this gigantic space? So he came out to start working with a variety of elected officials in the region, and he got an earful from the United Auto Workers, who said, President Obama, try to keep Toyota here. It may be that it's too late. It may be that it might have been possible once, but it's a very, very long shot now. So I think that most of the effort will go into what can you possibly do. There's 5,400 workers approximately inside the factory, another 21,000 in 1,000 supplier firms throughout the Central Valley in Northern California, all the way down to the south. Huge impact on the region.
Tom, there's always talk about trying to look at the new economy of energy efficient cars and wind, solar power, all those different things. I mean, is there talk or real effort looking at, as you said, you have to retrain the workers, but to use this plant, this facility, to try to really push this forward? Because there seems to be a consumer hunger for these products as well, if you could just bring the price down.
Well, it's just if you could bring the price down and then you bring the volume up. That factory puts out, I don't know, 450,000 automobiles, conventional automobiles. The new manufacturers are talking about building in the few thousands. So the scale is wrong. Now, there have been some interesting developments in solar. Solar manufacturing might happen. There's new battery technologies that are actually sprouting up in the East Bay. There's 2 or 3 promising companies that could make batteries. That might be a candidate for it. There's also, quite frankly, at least some chance that as Toyota walks away, as GM walks away, that you might get a Chinese or a Korean manufacturer to see some virtue in an auto plant. But it's really, there's not a lot of industries that can employ 5,400 factory workers.
We keep hearing, the worst is over, the economy's turning a corner, or, banks are lending or making more money or whatever. Here's a blow that's coming up, next April, to the Bay Area economy.
Right.
Jobless recovery sounds like one of the real oxymorons of all time, but what's happening here? Is it that there's one aspect of the economy that's getting better, but the one that affects sort of ordinary people is continuing to get worse?
Well, it's ironic because the president's man out here, Montgomery, made a comment, which I put in the story that'll be in the Chronicle, about the president believes that the auto industry was the backbone of the growth of the middle class, and that back is being broken as we speak, because the high-paying jobs that came in great numbers are disappearing for a variety of reasons, and there aren't the numbers. I covered a factory opening in Pittsburgh that created, it took $1 million a job to create 100 jobs.
Now, the president's in the Far East, in Japan, I think today. I mean, are there any hopes that he might be meeting with some high-ranking officials on this trip that could have any impact on Toyota's action?
I'm sure that there are always hopes, but I spoke with Alameda County Supervisor Keith Carson afterwards, and he said, we can ask the president, but I just don't have any great confidence anything would happen. I believe that if the president thought he could have any leverage on this, he would have done it in the lead up to it, and it just didn't happen. The president also had a great deal of leverage with GM, which quite frankly, for whatever battering Toyota gets, GM should be battered orders of magnitude more. And the president had more leverage, presumably, with them, and for whatever reason hasn't exercised
as we
it.
leave this, was there any spark that something that local officials could do that could push Washington to do a little more?
I think they got the message. I think Ed Montgomery got the message today that this region would like the president to do something more. Thank you very much for coming out here to clean up the mess, but if there's any way that you could get a little more involved, we'd be appreciative. I think he got that word.
Which he probably hears from 52 states.
At least all of the ones with auto factories, certainly.
Thank you, Tom. Rachel, you're dealing with the San Francisco sanctuary policy, which is, for me anyway, still a little bit confusing as to where the real legal rights are.
Well, let's look back at this a little bit. About 20 years ago, San Francisco proposed a sanctuary ordinance, passed it, which says city officials are not at all going to go out of their way to help federal authorities deport people who might be in this country illegally. San Francisco was at the forefront of the movement, but by far not the only city who's done that. There are about 30 cities across the country that have sanctuary ordinances. It's really saying hands off. We're not going to use our police, our probation officers, the sheriff's deputies to say, here you go, federal authorities, put people back in Mexico or Honduras or wherever it might be. What happened this week is kind of the next step of that. The question is, what do you do with juvenile offenders who have been arrested for felony offenses who may be in this country illegally? It used to be San Francisco's long-held policy that unless you are convicted of a crime, we're not going to do anything. We're not going to turn you over to it was the INS, but now it's ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency. We started hearing stories, though, on one really heinous case last year where there was a juvenile offender who had a criminal record when he was a kid, who then a year ago, he's been accused of gunning down, murdering a family of three, a father and his two sons. That got people thinking, is this the right way to deal with these offenders? Should he do something else? So Mayor Newsom changed the city policy saying, okay, now we want to have our law enforcement officials turn over these folks upon arrest, not upon a conviction anymore. The Board of Supervisors said that's not San Francisco. We're more compassionate than that. Let's go back to the old way and say you cannot participate in any immigration proceedings on your own, to be proactive about it until conviction again. They say it's an issue of due process. The Board of Supervisors passed this law on 8-3 vote. That's a veto-proof majority. Mayor Gavin Newsom vetoed it quickly, as he said he would. The Board of Supervisors this week overrode that veto. So the question, where does it stand now? It's likely going to stand up in court. That's where it's going to be settled.
Yeah, and the mayor says he'll disregard it. It conflicts with federal law. The federal law says you can't prohibit your employees from reporting to the federal government on the immigration status of people. There's mixed opinions, and I found out anyway, and you did too, of course, about whether the law was intended to basically preempt a local sanctuary orders. But meanwhile, the mayor says, I'm not paying any attention to that law. I'm not going to enforce it. How can he do that? Didn't the state Supreme Court say you got to follow the law until it's overturned? And what's the board going to do about it?
They told that to Gavin Newsom.
Yeah.
David Campos, who's a San Francisco supervisor, who's a sponsor of the law, and I think importantly as well, came to this country without documentation when he was a teenager from Guatemala, said, look, the mayor can't decide what laws he wants to enforce and what laws he doesn't want to enforce. So there might be some legal action. Forget the question of this going to be allowed by the federal government. They want to also have it settled. Does Gavin Newsom, under city law, the city charter, does he have to carry out the will of the supervisors, the legislative branch, until the courts tell him he doesn't have to do that? So we might see that fight as well. I think at this point there's a lot of rhetoric and a lot of infighting. There might be some kind of coming together of minds and hearts at City Hall. I wouldn't bet on that, though, to try to figure it out. And the city attorney, Dennis Herrera, who's elected on his own, is also in there. He did something interesting right after the veto override this week. He shot a letter off to U.S. Attorney Joe Rusinello going, look, what are you going to do about this? Are you going to, one of the fears is that if San Francisco doesn't cooperate with immigration officials, that the individual employees, whether you're a police officer or a probation officer, they might be held criminally liable for harboring an illegal immigrant in this country. So Herrera, the city attorney, said, what are you going to do about that, Mr. U.S. Attorney? Are you going to come after our people individually? And the U.S. Attorney hasn't been, he's not going to go there and say, I'm going to do this one way or the other. He wants federal law to be followed.
Is San Francisco out there all by itself on this issue, or other cities that are grappling with it?
There are other cities that are grappling with it. Los Angeles is one of them. In fact, one of the big issues that Campos's main point has been, look, we are a city of immigrants in San Francisco, very large Latino community, very large Asian community, that what happens if people are scared to cooperate with police? What happens if someone witnesses a crime or is a victim of a crime and wants to report that to authorities? Can they fear then that the authorities are going to take them in and turn them over? I mean, it's many different levels there. It's an issue that there was one story I read saying, look, this kind of brings the whole angst over immigration in this country right now into the center of San Francisco. Is San Francisco alone on it? Yes, and we have been a lot of times on big issues. Domestic partners benefits is one of them. Health care, who's going to be paying for health care, is another one that's landing up in the federal courts as well. So they've tried to push the envelope before. Oftentimes with success. We don't know where this one's going to land.
Because we're talking about here with you, local legislators having a tug of war. Bob, we're going to move to your story where there's been a tug of war at another level between the federal courts and the governor of the state. So the governor has been resisting an order to do something about prison overcrowding, and now we have a proposal. Where are we?
Well, the federal courts, which ruled some time back that health care in California prisons was basically unconstitutional, cruel and unusual punishment. The federal judge found this was killing one inmate a week unnecessarily, appointed a receiver to manage it and all that. In August, a 3-judge panel said overcrowding in the prisons is the main cause. These prisons were designed for 80,000. They now hold 150,000 in addition to 18 or 20,000 in camps and other facilities and like that. You've got to do something about it. Well, Schwarzenegger had already gone to the legislature and went back to them and said, here are a number of reform, a number of changes we want to make to reduce the prison population. With all those people in prisons, it's not hard to find folks that you think don't have to necessarily be there. You know, drug possessors, old people, sick people, people convicted of less violent crimes, and parole violators. The big the big cause of crowding. People, there's a revolving door for parole violators in this state. You commit a technical violation, you go in for 3 more months. We're the only state that puts every released convict on parole. There are a lot of ways to do it. The legislature, Republican refusal, Democratic nervousness would not go along with many of the proposals. The governor's back in court. The court is giving him a deadline, pretty much threatening to hold him in contempt. And finally this week...
Wasn't that the very deadline that day?
This was the
Thursday?
deadline. And finally this week the state said, okay, we can reduce the prison population by the 40,000 that you're requiring. Basically a little more than a quarter. The way to do it is implement our proposals yourself. Use your power to basically override state law. What we're looking at, if the U.S. Supreme Court doesn't intervene, I want to get to that, is the prospect for the first time really of federal courts sort of running the prison sentencing system, or at least a part of it. Grand theft, for example. The governor had proposed raising the threshold for grand theft from $400 to $950, kind of keeping pace with inflation for 20 years. Legislature wouldn't go along. The governor is now telling the court, well, you can pretty much implement that if you exercise your power. We don't think you should. We think the whole thing is, violates federal law. But just in case it doesn't, here's how it can be done without our fingerprints being on it.
Isn't that sort of ironic for the Republican governor to be asking to the courts to legislate essentially how California deals with its prisoners?
Well, yes, it is, except that there's probably no other alternative, and at the least you can say that the courts made me do it, and in fact now the courts will be doing it. There are other major proposals to allow certain people convicted of crimes that were formerly felonies, receiving bad checks, simple drug possession, for people without serious records and major major amounts of theft and all, to go to county jail instead of prison. Others will go to home monitoring under GPS instead of state prison, where they arguably don't need to. The legislature wasn't going to do this and refused to do
what
it.
are the most provocative proposals in here? Was it building new prisons, sending people out of state? What do you think is the most
What the
provocative?
legislature balked at was anything that could be called early release. It's fairly easy to say you're going to turn thousands of people loose on our lowering the prison population by 40,000. You're going to turn these people loose in our community. The governor said this can be done safely. Low-level offenders, nonviolent, get the parolees, back on. It's very difficult to defend that in the legislature, particularly in an election year when some Democrats refuse to go along. Now he has the shield that the court can do it for him. Of course, this could all go before the U.S. Supreme Court, which may decide, if they accept the state's arguments, that federal courts really don't have this kind of power to manage state sentencing and state prisons.
It also seems though like it's passing the buck, right? You're saying going to county jails. The county jails are already bursting at the seams a little bit. If you want paroled, more monitored parole, you have to have the parole officers to do that, and all the monitoring systems. How's that going to play out, just trying to sell people on it politically, let alone the skittishness that someone who's released early might commit another crime?
It's certainly going to lower the expenditures necessary at the state level, because there will be fewer prisoners, fewer need for staff and the like. On the other hand, this doesn't necessarily have to work. The state, for example, is reducing its expenditures on rehabilitation, on training and things like that. So
Drug treatment.
Yeah, treatment. So the kinds of things that might enable you to release people. And as you said, the counties are bursting. They don't have the aid, and the state isn't increasing its aid to local governments. These things could all work on paper. They take a coordinated effort, and it's being done. You do it, courts, and we are sort of not providing a coordinated program.
Well, Bob, I want to ask about a group, but we did quite a long story here about people, third strikers, who are hoping that somehow this would apply to them, people who've been in prison with no possibility of a chance of parole, sometimes over minor offenses. Are they being considered in this prison reduction
Quite
plan?
to the contrary, anyone with any strike on their record is not going to be eligible for that sort of early release. And this is only going to people who have relatively short sentences to serve. The third strikers, by definition, 25 to life at a minimum. They're not going to go free under any of this.
Okay. Thanks to all of you. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Rachel. And thank you, Tom.